Okay, so in this webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about what is Azure Information Protection and why the protection of information that is used in the enterprise is useful for security purposes. And then at the end of the webinar, we're going to have a few questions, answers, and if you want to mention anything or want to comment on anything that we presented in this webinar, well, you are free to do it. My name is Sergio Romero. I work as a technical advisor at Innova Solutions. I usually help salespeople to get requirements on different solutions, especially cloud solutions, to perform migrations or to advise customers on how to move different resources and solutions to the cloud. And this webinar is a series of webinars that we are focusing on security. So we already have a webinar on device management, and we had a webinar on Active Directory and authentication. And the reason of these webinars is that most of our customers that have Office 365, they cannot control the security in every single aspect of the infrastructure. For example,
Sergio, sorry, I cannot see your screen. I'm not sure if everyone else can see it. Now I can see your screen.
Yeah, I think there was some issue there. Okay. So what I was mentioning is that Microsoft can control the security of their data centers, for example, firewalls, antivirus, backup, replication. They can do some disaster recovery purposes in the information that are in their data centers, but they are not the only ways that security can be breached. So for example, we have the users in the left. So if you have the most secure data center in the world, but the user shares the password with somebody else, the information can be leaked. We also have devices, because our cell phones, our tablet, our computer has already lots of company information in the applications within the cell phone, or within the computer, or within the tablet, and so on. And lately, the files itself, because once we put some information in a file and that file goes into a flash memory or an external hard drive, that information can be shared easily with people outside the information. And all these types of information storage or information access types are difficult for Microsoft to control because they are not in their data center, users, devices, or files. So for users, what we do is we try to enforce identity. For users, what we try to do is to enforce identity, which means we try to ensure that the user is the person that he says he is, and try to control which resources he has access to. For devices, we try to control the configurations of the devices that access the data. For example, the supported or approved operating systems, if they are they have a virus, they have some virus solution if they're encrypted, and so on. For applications, we control which applications can access the data, and for information, we can protect the information in the files itself, in the files themselves, which means that it doesn't matter if the file is leaked in a flash memory and external hard drive, the protection goes within the information. So for identity, what we do is authentication and authorization. This is done by Azure Active Directory, the tool that we mentioned in the first webinar of this series. For devices and for applications, we do some management and access control. And for information, we embed the protection within the files itself. So I'm gonna mention you a little bit of this later in this webinar. So there are three main products that we are mentioning in this series of webinars. The first, Azure AD Premium, that already protects the identity of access of users. The first part on the previous slide, see, the users themselves. And this tool does that by getting advanced reports. For example, when a user logs in from one country and 5 minutes later he logs in from another country, or he logs in like 30 times per second and so on, he allows the users to reset their own passwords or perform some advanced conditional access by choosing users, groups, platforms that they use, the applications that they can access, or from which device they are trying to connect to, and we can control the access based on different conditions. With Intune, that is the tool that we mentioned in the last webinar, we can do some device management. So we can do a couple of broad things that are mobile device management that allow us to control the state of the device, if they are encrypted, if they have an antivirus, if they have the approved operating system. We can set a device in not compliance, and therefore we can forbid the access to cloud applications. We can do the same for applications within cell phone, a tablet, or a computer. We can restrict access to applications, and we can restrict what can those applications do with the data. If they are connected to Office 365 or if they are connected to some platforms, we can control that. And if a device is compromised, we can remotely wipe the information. We can select to format the whole device so it is blank, the memory is completely wiped, or we can choose to remove only the company data, which means that the applications of the user, Netflix, Facebook, YouTube, and whatever are not touched. Only the company information is removed from the device. It is useful when the user leaves the company, or when the device is stolen, or the device is lost and contains some sensitive information. And in this webinar, we're talking about Azure Information Protection. So before going into these topics, let me mention a few things about this. Azure Information Protection, the main component is Rights Management Services. This technology already existed in Windows Server 2003, and it wasn't broadly used because it was a little complex to implement it. What is the idea of Rights Management Services? To encrypt and set the permissions in the files. So whatever the file is, the permission travels with the files. So we have here a Word document. We encrypt the document with an easy to decipher key. I'm going to tell you in a second why. So it's an easy to decipher key because the document can be large, and we want a way to unencrypt it without having to use too much resources. And the key to encrypt the document is encrypted in the header of the document. Okay, so the header of the document contains the key to unencrypt the document, and also permissions of the user. If the user is allowed to view, read, print, edit, manage the document. Okay, so these Rights Management Services existed some time ago, but the order for this to work needed a Windows Server role, which is RMS, Rights Management Services Server. This server allowed to unencrypt documents. The problem was that when this document travels to other places, it was difficult to contact the origin RMS server to unencrypt the documents. Right now, with Microsoft Rights Management Services, to unencrypt the document, any Microsoft Office or any Adobe Reader or any supported application can contact Microsoft services online and unencrypt the documents and get the permissions from wherever part of the world they are. So what the people who receive the documents do is they get the document which is encrypted and protected. They say that they are the user who they are by their username and password, and Microsoft Office, in this case, contacts the service of Azure RMS, and they try to identify if the user already has permissions to unencrypt the documents. by using some information that is stored in the document itself. If the user effectively has the right to open the document, he is given the key and he can unencrypt the document and see it and print it and edit it or whatever the permissions say that they are allowed to. So this component, Azure RMS, is in the cloud. So whatever the customer is, they just contact these servers online and they can unencrypt the document. And they can do it so several times, and they can store these permissions on the cache of Microsoft Office, so they can open the document several times without having to access internet again. Okay, so why do we want to encrypt document? Why do we want to use rights management services? First of all, compliance. There are some companies that, because of the business types, they want to ensure some information is secure. The Information Security Office says you need to encrypt documents, you need to make the steps needed to make sure this information is not viewed by unauthorized people. Other reason to share confidential information. Sometimes I do want to share confidential information, but I want to make sure that only the people I share the information with is able to see it. And sometimes I want to make sure that they can see the information, but they cannot print it, or they cannot copy it, or they cannot edit it. Reduce leaks. Sometimes the information is not leaked because the information is shared, but because the user simply does not know how to handle the information, or the devices of the user, his computer, some shared folder is exposed to some external people who wants to make use of that information. And minimize blockages. Sometimes rights management services can allow a user to block access to information, and later on that user can leave the information, can leave the company, and the information will be impossible to be accessed. So this information also helps to recover that those encrypted documents. Some supported applications. Rights management services can be used with Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. Adobe Reader can be used with SharePoint, OneDrive, or Exchange on-premises or in the cloud, and for file servers on Windows file servers and some other file types. This asterisk means that Azure Information Protection allows people to encrypt other file types, but within a container. So for JPG files, those will be encrypted into a PJPG file, or a PNG file will be encrypted into a PPNG file. It adds a P at the beginning of the file type. So whatever means you use to encrypt information, all those servers or all those applications will connect to the Azure RMS server to get information about permissions and users who should be allowed to access the information. Okay, so what does information protection give me as a user? I can set up permission. This is the most basic stuff. So whatever or whichever document I apply protection to, I can say I give this user permission to view, to edit, to read, to print, to manage, to erase, to change, or to set other permissions. And I can say I want to set these permissions and allow the user to access or to do these things during 7 days, 30 days, or the period that I consider appropriate. I can also remove permissions as I want to. So as an owner of the document, I can open the document, I change the permissions anytime. I can also specify users. The users are specified by the email. So usually the user to open a document has to authenticate with their email, and if their email is not an Office 365 email, they will simply have to open a message sent to their inbox to make sure they are the user that they say they are. We can set expiration dates for the documents so they can no longer open a file that is expired. We can give offline access, and we can specify the number of days they are allowed to access the file without having to connect to internet. We can set up some special formatting in the document. For example, let's say we are going to protect a document and this document is confidential. So we can specify a watermark, a diagonal watermark saying this is a confidential information or a top secret information, and it modifies the document itself at the time the protection is applied. And we can use some templates so to make it easier for users to apply these options up here. We can also specify labels. What's the difference? Template says read, print, view, etc. Labels are an easier way to tag documents. So for example, we can define some labels: personal, public, private, internal, confidential, highly confidential, and behind those labels there are several things that can be applied to a document. For example, if I say a document is public, it shouldn't be encrypted. But if I say a document is internal, I can specify behind that label that some permissions are applied to the document, that only people within the same company are able to open the file. And if I say some documents like confidential or highly confidential, I can say that only managers or only people with some password or only people within that group can open the file. And the file would be with a top secret diagonal watermark applied. So it is easier for users to apply those labels because the permissions and all the configurations of the file are within those labels. We can also support sub-labels like we do here. So within some categories, we can specify additional categories, or we can do some auto-labeling. What is this feature? That we can say that Office 365 detects the information within a file, and according to what the information is found in that file, it can apply a label. For example, if it detects some credit card numbers, IP addresses, social security numbers, Office 365 can label the file automatically depending on what information is found inside the document. Okay, we also have one tool called Azure Information Protection Viewer. The viewer is a tool that allows me to encrypt any type of file. So if we have files that are not Office or are not emails or are not PDF files, we can encrypt AutoCAD files, images, or any other type of files you want into a specific container. This tool also allows me to do some document tracking. See, so we have the Azure Information Protection here. And this Azure Information Protection here has this option to track and revoke permission, which sends me to this special website. This website allows me for each file or for each protected file that I've shared with people outside my company, I can see any place in the earth where this document has been tried to open or has been accessed, and I can see who tried to open, which time, and I can revoke access, I can change permissions, I can remove the user because he's misbehaving or making bad use of the file that I share with him. So I can not only protect files, but I can track where those files has been accessed and do something about it. Well, this information is just for sales purposes, but there are different plans where the RMS protection is included. One is ADRMS that you can access in your local Windows Server infrastructure. The other is Office 365 RMS that is included in some plans like Office 365 Enterprise E3 or Office 365 Pro Plus, and Azure RMS that is a plan that is included into this huge tool or this suite called Enterprise Mobility and Security, which I mentioned at the beginning. So let me just this suite called Enterprise Mobility and Security includes the tools to manage the identity of users, the tools to manage the devices of users, and the Azure Information Protection tool that is used to protect files in whatever place they are. Okay, so before you start using information protection, or if you are interested in using Azure Information Protection or start protecting files, you have to consider a few things. First, planning. So you know that the Office 365 files are supported, also Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive online or on premises. You have to define which files are you are going to apply the protection, or in which conditions you are going to apply the protection. And you have to know that for Office files, you need Microsoft Office to unencrypt those files. For other types of files, you will need the Azure Information Protection Viewer. Use the KISS principle. These principles say keep it simple, stupid, which means that you already have lots of tools to protect information, and you have lots of possibilities to apply permissions, expirations, users, groups, etc. But this protection has to be easy to use for all users. So make it simple. Consider sublabels for different departments. For example, confidential for finance may be different as confidential files for human resources. So you have to identify the right labels, and if the same label has a different meaning for different departments, then you can create sub-labels to specify which department should those labels apply to. And and finally, awareness and training. So the most important thing of applying these types of solution is train the IT people so they can do troubleshooting on the tools and know how to apply the tools, and an awareness to the users. So they know that some files should not be shared with external users, some information, some confidential, or some information should be kept inside the local corporate network, and so on. So that's the most important thing. Okay, we can also protect email messages because the information protection solution also works with Exchange Online. And we can discover sensitive content, as I said, with a tool that can detect the information within the files to apply labels or apply protection depending on what is inside those files. I hope you liked that information. You have this webinar. If you have any questions, you can use the chat window or use your microphone, or if you want to search for further information on these tools, you can check the links in the slide.
Any questions, anyone? Okay, then let's move on to the next slide.
Okay, thank you very much for being in this webinar. I share with you the upcoming events. I hope you can be there. Here we have a few events programmed for different countries.
Yes.
And see you next time.
Stefano, do you have a question? Okay, so our upcoming events, we have our next webinar, which would be on May 2nd. We have a huge quantity of EMS events coming up. We have one March 11th in Puerto Rico. And in May, we have Bahamas, Trinidad, Belize, and Cayman Islands. So we hope that you guys can make it to be at least at one of our events where you can learn a bit more about the modern workplace and security. And besides that, I know is also celebrating our 10-year anniversary this month. So stay tuned for some activities in your country if we have a local office present. We thank you guys for joining our webinar, and we look forward to seeing you guys at either one of our events or at our next webinar. Be sure to follow us on social media as well to stay up to date with the latest news and events.